Hello, and welcome back to Dave's American Flyer Trains for the continuation of a series called Common Hidden Problems. This is going to be the fourth in the series. If you missed the first three, they were axle and wheel removal, pickup wheel spring tension, and pilot truck bounce. I invite you to go back and look in the history of Dave's American Flyer Trains videos for those. Common because they're not that unusual, hidden because sometimes it's difficult to pinpoint the root cause and you can be misdirected to other areas. Kind of like fool me once, your fault, fool me twice, my fault. I just got fooled twice by this one, and I'd already lived this experience once in a previous layout when I was attempting to build an elevated railroad that had a grade change, taking steam locomotives, particularly die-cast steam locomotives, up the grade in a turn was proving to be very problematic to get them to maintain track contact. But first, let's say the groundwork with what we're working with. This is number 322, and by the way, what we're going to discuss today is not exclusive to 322. It just happens to be the last one that had occurred with me and gave me this problem that I had to correct. But I've had other locomotives do the exact same thing, particularly some that have a particular type of coupler. So this one happens to be a 464. You're familiar with it, number 322, Hudson, die-cast boiler and tender. And it has smoke and tender. Now you might think, well, what does smoke and tender really have to do with this? Well, I'll explain it a little bit later. Let's first describe the symptoms before we go into the root cause and then the correction. You'll recognize them. Train is moving along just fine and suddenly stops. And that's because it has quickly shifted the reverse unit drum into the neutral position. Sometimes it'll be going forward, it'll quickly shift to neutral, and then quickly shift to the opposite direction, whether it be going in reverse or forward. It doesn't matter if it's pulling cars or not, it displays the same behavior. You might see the wheels sparking. You might even see the train suddenly stop, but then keep going, as though it just somehow quickly dropped power and then picked power back up again. You might even hear the reverse unit clicking, not quite going through the cycle entirely, but making a clicking noise. And sometimes you'll only see this occur on switches, but that's explanatory because those sections of track are very difficult to be level, and therefore they can rock the tender a little bit. Now, I was distracted. I went looking for problems in the track. I rebuilt this train. I went into the tender and I rebuilt the smoke and tender unit. I did not rebuild the smoke unit, but I did rebuild the motor that drives the piston. This one has a replacement system in it. It does not have the bellows. I went and worked on the track connection, the pins, the positioning of the track, the positioning of the switch, the wiring on the switch. I looked at everything except what I should be looking at, and that was the locomotive itself. And what disappointed me is I had actually seen this once before. Now, what we're working with, again, is a coupler that is sometimes referred to in the nomenclature of the parts as just a coupler, or maybe a coupler bar. A coupler strap, which is where this end connects. It's a strap that goes across the back of the cab, which connects to the coupler with a single screw. Two power cables, and then the smoke rubber tube. All of these can be contributing to this. And here's how they each can contribute individually. It is possible, as I have demonstrated in some of my trains, to have these power cables so taut without this little loop that when the train goes around a curve, it has the ability to lift the tender up beyond really what you can see with the naked eye, just enough to break the contact with the power wheels, believe it or not. I have dealt with that issue before, simply because it's going around a turn and because I did not leave enough of a bend in this power cable. I had it just almost pulled straight down. Now there's two slots on this particular train, as there are in others. There's two slots that these power cables go through. They're not holes, they're slots, which means they can drop out. I have seen these cables drop out and get hung up right here underneath the chassis of the tender, lower than they should be. Again, when the train goes around a curve, suddenly it'll stop or begin that erratic behavior. All because the cable was A, too short, or it was not in its proper position. I've seen it do the same thing if in fact I had pulled the rubber hose for the smoke too taut as well. So it goes around a curve and it starts pulling on this to pull the train, just enough to lift the power wheels off the railhead. The other thing that can occur is that if these power cables are pulled too taut and are not long enough, they will pull down on the pin, which is in, of course, the jack panel. And as I'm going to point out in a later video, I'm going to show how I make adjustments to the jack panel, mainly by simply squeezing down on the slots or the openings that the pins go into and making them tighter. But I have seen it such that these cables are too short and they pull on the pin, thus causing this erratic behavior. But here is the number one cause that I have worked on multiple times in several different coupler configurations. So it's not really unique to this one, but this one seems to be one of the worst. And that is, it's caused by a bent or distorted coupler. Now this one has been bent in its lifetime. I find that when customers send these to me, that they are bent in the upward position or the downward position, probably because it occurred in shipping, or it may have occurred over its lifetime when it was dropped in a toy box or put up for storage, that the coupler had too much pressure put on it from the weight of the tender and the weight of the locomotive, and thus bent the coupler itself. Could have also done damage to the coupler strap or either one of the contact points, a rivet or the screw. So the rubber hose, the cables not being in position, being too short, can cause the tender to lift beyond really being able to see it by naked eye, just enough to cause that break in contact. But again, what I found to be the most important one is the coupler, in that it is not pulling the tender in what I call a perfect draft. The tender should follow the locomotive's airspace, in other words. And what I found in this last one was that I had not properly adjusted the coupler. And I didn't really see it until I decided finally to put it on some straight track on the layout, get down at eye contact, eye level, and look at it, and I started pressing on the tender. And noticed that this front truck was floating a little bit, meaning it was coming off of the rail just slightly. But when I pressed on the front of the tender, I noticed that the front of the locomotive was raising up just a little bit. Well, that told me that because the locomotive, the boiler, weighs more than the tender, when it sat down level on the track, it was pulling up. Let me demonstrate with my finger. It's pulling up on the tender ever so slightly. I couldn't see it with a naked eye. You probably can't see it right now with a naked eye, but it was just enough to float the tender. Well, when it went across switches and stuff, it may have just floated it just too high and it broke the contact. It was also why it was occurring at different locations on the track, yet I could not see anything. I could barely see the spark locations. So what I had to do, and what I did, was basically took two medium-sized pliers, one needle nose and the other a regular set of pliers, and repositioned this coupler. Now it has to be done carefully because this end right here is connected with a rivet, and you don't want to pop the rivet, although it's not impossible to replace it, and it possibly could be replaced with a nut and bolt. But I didn't want to, but you have to carefully do that. And notice now that the coupler really floats between the pull points. And then if I press down on the tender, it's not pulling the front of the locomotive upward. And if I push down on the front of the boiler, it's not lifting up. It has enough play in it to not lift up on the tender. And this is the second time that this particular problem has attacked me, but it was hard to see. Now, when I put it on the track, on the rail head, it's difficult to get these rail heads perfectly level. You might set it on a section rail head which has a slightly upward bend to it, and it won't display those characteristics when you press down on this or press down on the boiler. So what I decided to do in order to double check it was put it on the most flat surface I thought I had, and that was my Glenn Snyder train display system. These aluminum sections where I display my trains is probably more level than any place on the track. You possibly could get two pieces of straight track sections, hook them together, make sure that they're very, very level, make sure that all the ties are at 90 degrees, and put it on, say, a piece of plexiglass that is probably going to have a good chance of being perfectly level, and you might have seen the same thing. But when I put it up here on the Glenn Snyder display system on these aluminum rails, it was so flat that I could see it right away that the tender was floating just a little bit because it was being lifted up because of the coupler was not pulling these two in a perfect concert of a draft where this one follows the airspace of this one. But now it does. I put it back on the track, I adjusted the coupler, I put it back, and it has worked fine ever since. When did it get bent? I'm not sure. I did rebuild this one a time or two, probably had a couple of wrecks. What I find when I get these from customers is that these couplers are badly distorted because of rough handling or having been dropped and pushed together like that, enclosed, pushed down, and it bends the couplers pretty badly, or it even bends the coupler strap right here at the back of the cab. Well, that wraps up this session of a common hidden problem that it's not unusual that it occurs. It's very difficult to diagnose and to pinpoint, and it can lead you to look in other areas which don't need any attention at the time, and it does cause problems such as quick reversals or stoppage in the train, or even excessive sparking, which can cause other problems. Thanks again for watching Dave's American Flyer Trains. So long, everyone.